Good morning, everyone. We studied the portion of Bo, the third portion in the book of Exodus. In this week's Torah portion, we read about the last three plagues: locust, darkness, and the death of firstborn, and the actual exiting from Egypt. That's why the word Bo is made out of Bet and Aleph. Bet is number 2 in numerical value, and Aleph is number 1. So combined, it's 3. It's a sign that the Torah portion is about 3 plagues. But in between the 9th and the 10th, God is commending the Jewish people uniquely conduct that did not do before. And in order for the Jewish men to be exiting from Egypt after the 10th plague and to be saved from the death of firstborn, they had to actively get involved in serving God. So I'm reading the text in the Torah before we get into some of Rashi and deeper understanding. It is on chapter 9, chapter 12. God spoke to Moshe and to Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month should be the head of the months for you. It should be the first of the months of the year for you." So the first commandment actually that appears in the Torah is this Torah portion. Everything that we study in the book of Genesis and in Exodus until now, it was history, so to say, a lot of lessons, but commandments. The first commandment in the Torah, unlike people who say purvu, is not a commandment given to the Jewish people. It was given to mankind. And later on Mount Sinai, God reiterated it, gave it again. So the real mitzvah, the first mitzvah, is to count the months. And the first month is Nisan for us. The universe is created on Tishrei, 6 months earlier. But the month that we're counting for holidays and for years, for kings, etc., begin in the month of Nisan, 14 days before they left Egypt. But God is then adding the second commandment. The second commandment is, let them take a sheep, each for their household, and they must be accounted for the consumption of that animal. They will not allow to leave any of the flesh for the morning. They are not allowed to grill it. There are many restrictions to the sacrifice. We know it as the Passover sacrifice. If in the household there are too few people to consume an entire animal, they have to join few families together, and they shall not leave the house until the morning. Another commandment, they have to take the blood of the sheep and paste it on the doorposts and on the lintel, so that God, when he goes by to destroy Egypt's firstborn, he will skip. Also, Pharaoh wanted the Jews to live in the middle of the night. As we read later, in the middle of the night, Pharaoh is searching for Moshe. Come on, leave. And Moshe said, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to leave the house. And they left at midday, in the middle of the day, which is another discussion. How come Pharaoh wanted them to live at night and they refused to live until the middle of the day? But that's not for today. But there is something else that we will be speaking about, and that is at what day they must take the sheep, acquire the sheep, and bring it into their homes on the 10th. What day did they leave Egypt? The 15th. What day they slaughter the sheep? At the 14th. So how many days the sheep lived with them in their bedroom? It had to be tied to their bedposts for 4 days. And the Torah tells us, verse 6 in chapter 12, והיה לכם למשמרת עד 14 יום לחודש. Let it be, you should hold it for inspection until the 14th day of the month. Take it in the tent, use it on the 14th. For 4 days, they had to live with a peh all day and all night while they are in their tents. Rashi, so the question that comes, what's the idea of 4 days before, which is, we call it unique to Passover in Egypt. Other years, you can take a Passover sacrifice the day of. Here, they had to have it 4 days earlier. In Passover of Egypt, they, in addition to placing the blood on the lentil and the doorpost, in the future years, there was no requirement. Says Rashi, I'm not going to discuss all of Rashi, but just the idea that we're going to be. Rabbi Mattia ben Charash, very famous rabbi, you will discover more about him, who would say that the Jewish people, at the time God is taking them out of Egypt, were unworthy of going out of Egypt because they were naked of any commandment. They had not served God, they didn't do anything right. And therefore, God gave them two bloods, two types of bloods. At a prerequisite before they left, the blood of Passover sacrifice and the blood of circumcision. Anyone who is not circumcised cannot live. And now we know in the future generations, anyone who is uncircumcised cannot partake in the Passover sacrifice. So, for example, someone whose doctor ordered not to be circumcised, there used to be situations when a child was died and his brother was born and circumcised and died. The third one is forbidden from having a circumcision because it's a positive that pushes a negative commandment. As we discussed before, the positive commandment to survive is more important than the negative not to be uncircumcised. However, they cannot partake in the Paschal offering. A child that was just born cannot be taken. A child that was born to a parents that never knew of the commandment and they discover Torah and they come to Israel and they are not circumcised, they can partake in every other mitzvah. The exception is Passover sacrifice. Says the Rebbe, Rabbi Mattia ben Charash explained that they were lacking any positive, any connection to God, and therefore God gave them two commandments. But Rashi is using it to address why 4 days earlier, and there is nothing about it 4 days earlier. They can fulfill that mitzvah the day of. In addition, that's number one. Number two, Rabbi Mattia ben Charash is talking about the blood of Passover and the blood of the circumcision. Which is, what did they do with the blood of the Passover? They pasted on the door. When did they do it? They did it on the 14th. They did it the night of the 15th. They didn't do it on the 10th. So definitely Rashi is addressing why you have to safeguard the animal for 4 days. He's bringing that story of Rabbi Mattia ben Charash. Have nothing to do with 4 days earlier. It has to do with the blood, not the preparation of the animal. That blood was pasted on the 14th, not on the 10th.
Question.
Yes. Number three, what's the connection of the blood of circumcision to here? How does Rashi addresses the questions that we're dealing with by telling us that there were two prerequisites? What does the blood of circumcision was mentioned earlier? Nothing to do with this story. And number four, the Rebbe says that the blood of circumcision is a commandment that will last forever, every year, as I just shared with you. The blood of Passover, and in addition, if someone was circumcised, they didn't need to do another circumcision. They didn't have to let blood. Rabbi Mattia ben Charash says they had no commandments, therefore God gave him those two. Blood of Passover, blood of circumcision. Someone who was circumcised, he didn't have two bloods, he had only one. In the other way, in the future generations, there is only one blood. Circumcision, there is no blood of Passover. There is no requirement to paste blood on the doorpost. So why is Rashi bringing that there has to be two types of blood? It's not necessarily all the cases. We're going to find out another 2 or 3 questions. Yes, Harry, directly connected.
Well, you said that they were without any mitzvahs or anything. How about the tribe of Levi, who kept everything for the whole time until it went out?
The tribe of Levi, just like the women, they were not required. That's what I just said. Someone who was circumcised had only one commandment, the blood of Passover.
Okay, but they were
because they were bonded with God, they were connected with God. Here is the commentator's explanation. Usually I avoid what the Rebbe brings commentators and disprove their point, but this time I think it's exciting. It's something that should be appreciated. Commentators say that Rabbi Mattia ben Harash bundles the two commandments together. That will explain why they had to do it on the 10th, 4 days earlier. Because circumcision, the law is, and Rashi brought it earlier in Shmot, two weeks ago, that when someone is circumcised, they are not allowed to leave their home for 3 days. Right? We study by Moshe. Moshe had a son, Eliezer. Eliezer was born, and God says to him, go to Egypt. He didn't know what to do. Should he circumcise him? You'll have to delay. Should he go? It's dangerous for the child. So what did he decide? He decided not to circumcise his son. So what's wrong? He actually did the right thing. That he was busy with the hotel and amenities. When they came to on the road, they stayed in an inn, a residence inn by Marriott, and he was checking in. Is there a jacuzzi? Is there a heated swimming pool? That's the reason God was upset. But the idea that he didn't circumcise his son was the right thing to do, because if he circumcised his son, he would have to delay his mission. Now comes Zipporah, she sees that there is a serpent that is eating him one half and then another half right to the place of the circumcision. She understood that that was his deficiency, that's the problem. So she goes and circumcises Eliezer, and that saved Moshe. We see from here, it's part of Jewish law. The first 3 days after an operation, by the way, it's not just circumcision. Anytime the body is opened and blood is out, 3 days are the most crucial time that a person can be affected by weather change. If there is strong wind, if it's too hot, it might cause a life-endangering situation. Therefore, we're going to talk about Abraham soon. Therefore, says God, take it in the tent. Because Mattia ben Harash says that those two come together. And therefore, circumcision they can do only on the 10th, not later. Because if they did it later, they cannot leave on the 14th. Therefore, that explains why God says, take the sheep 4 days earlier. Did you understand the explanation? Make sense? No, don't make sense. Why?
Because the sheep has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, what's that got to do with it?
The Rabbi says, I don't understand what's the connection.
But did Moshe leave?
Rashi says there were 2 types of blood, not 2 types of mitzvot. If there were 2 types of blood, there is no doubt that the blood of Passover was on the 14th. So what does that help? Number 2, and Rashi is bringing a verse, misbosses bedomaich, that there were 2 types of blood. Rashi does not say the sacrifice, the mitzvah of acquiring a sheep. So, and the Rebbe, 2 more questions very quick. Rashi adds that they were washed with idol worship. That's why God gave him those 2 commandments. And this opinion is actually Rabbi Eliezer HaKapar, a rabbi that disagreed with Rabbi Mattia ben Harash. And Rashi doesn't bother to say that there was somebody else who's saying that, and he's not bringing his name. And the last question, Rashi does not bring names of authors. Anytime he explains something, even though it's on behalf of somebody, unless it will help us understand the explanation. Rashi starts with the name Rabbi Mattia ben Harash, and it's seemingly the other part is also Rabbi Mattia's explanation, although in the Gemara, it's actually someone who disagrees and explained the story here totally different. So why Rashi bothered say the name? Did you understand? So let's summarize. Rashi says, when God says, take it for safeguard for 4 days earlier, Rashi says, Rabbi Mattia ben Harash says that they were naked of mitzvot, and therefore God gave them 2 types of blood, circumcision and Passover. And by doing so, they bonded with God, so they are deserving of exiting Egypt. Says the Rebbe, A, it doesn't explain why take it earlier, right? B, the blood, Rashi is talking about blood. The blood was done on the 14th, not on the 10th. C, what does circumcision have to do with this discussion? And number D, how can Rashi says, based on Rabbi Mattia ben Harash, there were two commandments that they are required to do. Some of them were circumcised already. Levi tribe, and they did not have that responsibility to circumcise themselves. So there were no two for everybody, there was only one. Here is the Rebbe's explanation. Again, the Rebbe is going from a scholarly point. I'm reversing it. So I hope that definitely if you wait and be patient, you will get the whole idea. Rashi says that Rabbi Matya ben Charash is not going to explain to us why 4 days earlier. The part that is going to answer why 4 days earlier is the last part. However, to understand the last part, we need an introduction with Rabbi Matya ben Charash. And let me explain. Rashi said at the end of his commentary that they were washed with idol worship. They had no commandments. They were naked of commandments. So God needs to rid them off of idol worship. How do you rid someone of idol worship? Not by taking a sacrifice the day of, because that could be a fluke. One time God says, you know what, I'll give you good dessert, just keep quiet, just do what I tell you. But then they're not going to change their attitude. God needed for them to change their attitude of being awash with idol worship. What was the idols of Egypt? The sheep. Sheep was the idol. We know it, it's mentioned in the Torah many, many places. So therefore, God wants them to do it for 4 days. 4 days shows a solid change of heart. Where do we see that? By Abraham. When God tells Abraham, take your son as a sacrifice, it says that God tested them for 3 days. By Yom HaShlishi, on the 3rd day, Abraham saw the cloud and he knew that's the place is. Says Rashi, why the 3rd day? Says Rashi, in the commentary, the Gemara says, God wanted to prove to the world that Abraham didn't do it just by, he had a change of heart temporarily, but he's not fully committed to serving God. Therefore, it took a full day of walking. And then they had to place pitch a tent and stay at night and protect themselves from animals. And then another day, and then another day. Only on the 3rd day, that's a full commitment. So if you count the days from when God told them to sacrifice until the actual sacrifice, how long did it take? 4 days. Because he was commanded one day and the next morning he journeyed, right? So 3 more days, you have 4. So 4 is a solid proof that what he's doing is not doing as a fluke. It's not making a mistake or an exception to the rule, but a real full change, a real full commitment. Do you understand? So if someone says to me, I'll come to Minyan every morning, for the first 4 days, I'm not sure whether he's fully committed. Don't laugh. How many times people say, don't worry, I'll be here every morning, or I'll make it once a week or twice a week. I had a campaign 2 years ago about adding 1 mitzvah. Remember to do 1 mitzvah a month? I got like between 10 and 20 commitments to be here at least once a month on a Friday night or Shabbat. Only one kept it. Only one kept it and kept reminding me once a month. When he showed up, he says, that's my commitment. Everybody else showed up once. And that was it. At least I tried and they tried.
Is this corollary to that?
Let me just conclude. Before we get to answer other questions. Says the Rebbe, Rashi wanted to tell us that the Jewish people were so awash with idol worship that God needed them to get rid of idol worship. Therefore, the best way to do that is by taking the God and slaughtering it. Therefore, in order for them to prove that they are not going to return to their bad behavior, it had to have been done for a long 4 days. Therefore, they had to take it. The years after, there is no commandment. Why there is no commandment? Because they already got rid of it. Now we can understand why Rashi is talking about the blood of Passover, not the mitzvah of eating the Passover. Says the Rebbe, because the Passover offering, the real main part of it should be the eating of that sacrifice, because it has so many conditions. The placing of the blood is only one detail. Yet Rashi is addressing and concentrating on that part only. Says the Rebbe, in order for them, that explains another question. Why two? Why not one? If they had been naked, no commandments, give them one commandment. Give them 5. What's 2? Says the Rebbe, there were 2 commandments, one representing a positive bonding with God, and another one is a restricting, not to do something wrong. The sacrifice, the mitzvah of circumcision is a positive, a brit, a covenant with God, to come into a covenant with God. Those of us who were circumcised at the time, they didn't have to do that because they already had that covenant. Then comes the Passover sacrifice. It wasn't about, says Rashi, eating the Passover, even though there were many details, and they were required to finish it off, which was very unusual. Every other sacrifice, you can leave. You don't have to finish. Also, you have to account for one of part of the consumption group party before the slaughtering of the animal. Other sacrifices, if someone has a thankful sacrifice in Jerusalem, and I happen to go there for the bar mitzvah of my son, and he says to me, I'm partying, I have a party, join me, I can join. There, if it no matter you Kohen, you Levi, it doesn't matter. If you're not counted before as part of that group, you're not allowed to partake. In other words, the mitzvah of sacrifice, of Passover sacrifice, is 80% about the consumption. Yet Rashi is avoiding the whole part and says about the blood of the sacrifice, pasting the blood on the doorpost. Why? Because that represents the negative part of the commandments. And therefore it was about slaughtering the idol of Egypt. And that's what God wanted. Says Rashi, now says the Rebbe, now I understand why Rashi is bringing in the mitzvah of circumcision, because those 2 mitzvot were crucial in connecting to God, and therefore they had to be done 4 days earlier. Otherwise, you're not sure that they have let go of the idol worship that they were copying and imitating the Egyptians. Now we can understand about Rabbi Matya ben Harash. You had a question?
Well, we have the idea of 3. You know, if you do something 3 times, you own it or something.
Hazaka, right. But here it's 4. It's fascinating. We study it in Sanhedrin, and I'm sure most of you will say you forgot, but I remember that. The Gemara says that Rabbi Matya ben Harash, in his time, he was a Tana. He lived about 2,000 years ago. He had a yeshiva in Rome. In Rome. Rome, Italy, Rome ruled Israel. He went and established a yeshiva in Rome, and his yeshiva was the largest yeshiva at his day. In other words, there was yeshivas in Israel, there was yeshivas in Bnei Brak, but in his time, the Gemara says, Achar Rabbi Matya le Rome. If you want to connect to in Torah in his time, you travel to Rome. Achar Rabbi Akiva lived right after him, to Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak is a town in Israel. Rabbi Akiva established in Bnei Brak. Rabbi Matya ben Harash established his yeshiva in Rome. Now, says the Rebbe,
a lot of Jews in Rome.
what?
Must be a lot of Jews in Rome.
Not only, yeah, and there were ministers in war. I shared with you war ministers and generals, not war ministers, but there were army generals in Rome that were Jewish. Rome wasn't always against the Jews. We know because of the miracles and the holiday we celebrate that they are evil people. But Rome lasted in relationship to the Jewish people about 400 years. There were times that they were very, very connected with the Jewish people. There was no plain hatred all the time. Also, there was the governors of Israel appointed by Rome to rule Israel that sometimes were very hostile to the Jewish people. Not a lot of the time. Rabbi Yehuda Anasi and Antoninus, a Italian governor in Israel, their bodies, he saved Rabbi Yehuda Anasi's life by having him sent to Rome to prove that he was uncircumcised. You know the story, no? They had a tunnel, they studied Torah together. Anyway, back to our discussion. Rabbi Matya ben Harash haya omer. The Rebbe says, look in Rashi. Rashi does not only bring you the name of the author, but says that he used to tell it to his students continuously. Haya omer, meaning continuously speaking about this. The idea that we just spoke, he used to teach his students all the time. Says the Rebbe, Rashi brought Rabbi Matya ben Harash because he did not do yeshiva, and he was the beacon of Torah for the entire universe in his day. That's what the Gemara says. Therefore, there must be, what he wanted is to read of the worst place, the lowest place of the earth, and reconnect it to God. And that's why you would tell his students, some of them would lament, why do we have to travel to Rome? I can let Israel, the Holy Land, remember, Holy Land, everybody is Holy Land, there is no, indisputable. But you would say to them, Rome is the most advanced part of the universe. All the inventions, all the new news, the fashion, like fashion and all the advancements came from Rome at the time. We all know streets, parliaments, all that came from Rome. He says only there is what we were going to return back and say, we are proud Jews and we are connecting to God. Just like the Passover sacrifice had to be taken into the homes, into the bedroom, and connected to the bedpost. Because you take the idol and you slaughter it. And that's how you slaughter impurity, and you convert the worst, the darkest part of the universe into positive, into light. And the Rebbe points out that that's why, by the way, what I just showed you with Rabbi Matya ben Harash is in Sanhedrin, the Talmud that we studied. The Rebbe says that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the current Rebbe's father-in-law, he died on Shabbat, on this Shabbat, Saturday morning he died, on the 10th of Shvat. His Yortzeit this year is on Tuesday. But at the time, in 1950, when he died, the 10th of Shvat appeared on Shabbat Bo. The Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, when he survived the Holocaust, he had a choice to go to Israel, and he could have enjoyed a life of a king, many Hasidim serving him. Instead, he chose America because he felt that in America, he can influence the rest of the universe. In Israel, he's limited. The entire Arab region, all the Muslim countries will have barred any communication. Many Jews who lived here in America look down upon people who lived in Israel because they are not as advanced, they don't have the means, they don't have the abilities. The Rebbe went to Rome. Rome at the time, and even today, is indisputable. You may disagree, I will prove it. America is Rome of our day, the most advanced country in the universe, influencing more of the universe than any other country, and it will remain that way unless China becomes a full democracy. Until then it might be India, they may have 1 billion people, China, they may have 1.2 billion, it doesn't matter. America with 350 million will always influence the rest of the universe disproportionately to the rest of the universe. It's impossible to argue with that. The Rebbe says, no, that's where he wants to go. Because of Rabbi Matya ben Harash said, if you want to bond with God, don't take the easy cop out to find the most comfortable, safest place, but find the place where the world is exposing itself to anything but God, and say, I can live my life as a godly person with serving God and pleasing God and be part of community and fulfill my obligations to society. And now we understand why God says to the Jewish people at the time to take the sheep 4 days earlier. And now we can understand, based on Rabbi Matya ben Harash, who binds the two together, two types of blood, because one is for the positive, a covenant with God, the other is for negative, to rid themselves of idol worship. It can only happen if they kept it for 4 days, not less than that. And that why Rashi brings the name of Rabbi Matya ben Harash, because he embodied that conduct by making his yeshiva successfully in his day and age. There are other yeshivot, no one is compared to Rabbi Matya ben Harash, because he wants to show with you that you can take the sheep, the Egyptian idol, bring it into your bedroom, and yet serve God by slaughtering that idol. Thank you, and have a good Shabbos.
Even after roasting it, the one allowed to crack the bones, they threw them at the